The thing about silence is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's not like a light switch flipping off in a dark room. It's more like a leak in a garden hose. Slow, rhythmic, and so quiet you don't realize the pressure is gone until the grass starts to turn brown. My name is Arthur Vance, and for 42 years, I was the man people called when they wanted something built to last. I was a civil engineer back when that meant you actually got your boots muddy and understood the tension of a suspension cable by the way it hummed in a high wind. I don't own a smartphone that tells me my heart rate, and I still drive a 1998 Ford F-150 with a manual transmission because I like the feeling of being the one who decides when the truck shifts gears. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. For 30 years, Sunday dinner was the anchor of the Vance family. It didn't matter if it was raining, snowing, or if the world was ending. At 6 p.m., the table was set. My wife, Martha, God rest her soul, used to say that a family that eats together can't keep secrets for long. Maybe she was right. Because after she passed 4 years ago, the secrets started growing like weeds in an untended lot. My son Julian is a strategic growth consultant. I've asked him 3 times what that actually means, and I've received 3 different answers involving synergy, scaling, and market disruption. He's a smart boy, sharp jawline, expensive haircuts, and a way of wearing a suit that makes him look like he's perpetually posing for a magazine cover. He married Tiffany 5 years ago. Tiffany is what my grandmother would have called ambitious. She views life as a series of social ladders, and she's determined to reach the top, even if she has to step on a few fingers to get there. The dinners started changing about 18 months ago. First, they moved from the old farmhouse I built, the one with the wraparound porch and the kitchen that smells like rosemary, to their new minimalist condo downtown. The kind of place where everything is white, the furniture looks like it was designed by a mathematician who hates backs, and the art on the walls is just a single black line on a gray canvas. Dad, Tiffany would say. Her voice is thin and bright as a fluorescent bulb. We just thought the farmhouse was a bit much for you to manage. The commute for us is so taxing after a long week of networking. I didn't mind the drive. I liked the city lights, even if the parking was a nightmare. But then, the texts started coming later and later on Saturday nights. Hey Dad, super slammed this weekend. Let's rain check dinner? Then it became going to a gallery opening, catch you next week? And then the month of May arrived. 4 Sundays, 4 rain checks. I spent those Sundays on my porch, watering my tomatoes and watching the sun dip behind the oaks. I didn't call and complain. I didn't beg. In my line of work, you learn that if a bridge is structurally unsound, you don't stand under it and yell at the concrete. You step back and look for the cracks. The crack appeared on a Tuesday morning. I was at the local hardware store picking up some washers for a leaky faucet when I ran into Old Man Miller. Miller has owned the local paper for 50 years and knows everyone's business before they do. Arthur, he said, tipping his cap. Big night for the Vance family this coming Sunday, eh? That Pioneer Award is a hell of a thing for Julian. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. The kind of feeling you get when you're surveying a site and realize the soil samples were tampered with. The Pioneer Award, I repeated. My voice as steady as a plumb line. Yeah, Miller chuckled. Oblivious. The big gala at the Meridian. Tiffany's been calling the office every day to make sure the guest list is printed correctly. Only the top 50 shapers and movers of the county, she said. Must be nice to have a private family celebration like that before the public ceremony. I nodded slowly. I didn't tell him I hadn't heard a word about it. I didn't tell him that my son and daughter-in-law were hosting the biggest event of their lives, and I was apparently the only one not invited. I'm sure it'll be a night to remember, Miller, I said. I went home, sat in my favorite leather chair, the one Julian keeps telling me to donate to a museum, and I looked at the wall. Specifically, I looked at a framed photograph of my grandfather, Silas Vance, standing on the 400 acres of timberland that had been in our family since the late 1800s. Julian had been asking about that land for months. He had ideas for it. A luxury glamping resort. A wellness retreat. He talked about it with a hunger in his eyes that I recognized. It wasn't the hunger of a man wanting to build a legacy. It was the hunger of a man who owed people money and saw his father's dirt as a way to pay them back. I picked up my house phone, yes, a landline, and dialed a number I hadn't called in a very long time. Thorne and Associates, a woman's voice answered. Put me through to Elias, I said. Tell him it's Arthur Vance. Tell him the bridge is failing, and I need a structural report. There was a pause. Then, the voice of a man I'd gone to school with, a man who had spent 40 years becoming the most feared real estate and corporate attorney in the state, came on the line. Arthur, Elias Thorne said, sounding genuinely pleased. I was wondering when you'd call. I've been watching your son's social media. He's been talking quite loudly about a certain piece of timberland. He talks too much, Elias. That's always been his problem. And Tiffany? She thinks silence means I'm not listening. She's about to find out it means I'm taking notes. I looked out the window. My garden was lush, my tomatoes were heavy, and my truck was gassed up. Julian and Tiffany thought they had successfully pruned me out of the family tree. They thought that by stopping the invitations, they had stopped the man. They forgot one thing. I didn't just build the farmhouse. I built the legal foundation of every single thing they think they own. I'm going to dinner this Sunday, Elias, I said, my voice dropping to that low, quiet rumble that used to make site foremen stop in their tracks. And I think I'd like you to be my +1. I'll have my suit pressed, Arthur. What are we bringing for dessert? Justice, I said, and maybe a little bit of reality. I hung up the phone. I looked at my Casio watch. 5 days until Sunday. Plenty of time to pull the permits. Julian and Tiffany wanted a night to remember. I was going to make sure they never forgot it. The thing about modern people is that they confuse newness with ownership. They think because they've repainted the walls and changed the light fixtures, the foundation belongs to them too. Julian and Tiffany had spent the last year acting like the Vance family legacy was a startup they'd just acquired in a hostile takeover. I spent Wednesday morning in the county records office. It's a quiet place, smelling of old paper and floor wax, the kind of place where the truth sits in heavy binders, waiting for someone with enough patience to turn the pages. I didn't need a computer to find what I was looking for. I knew the deed numbers by heart. I'd signed them alongside my father in 1994, and again when Martha and I set up the family trust. Arthur, the clerk said, pushing her glasses up her nose. Looking for something specific? Just checking the boundary lines on the North Ridge, Sarah, I said. I hear there's been some talk of development. She looked at me, her eyes softening. Your son's been in here twice this month, Arthur. He brought a couple of fellows in Italian suits. They were looking at the commercial zoning permits for the timberland. I thought you knew. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. I'm sure he just wanted to save me the trip. Thanks, Sarah. I walked out into the bright morning sun, my chest feeling like a bridge under a heavy load, compressed, but holding. Julian wasn't just skipping dinners. He was preparing to liquidate the one thing I'd spent my life protecting. That land wasn't just trees and dirt. It was the Vance heritage, a buffer of 400 acres that kept the town's sprawl from swallowing the valley. I decided to pay a visit to the Strategic Growth headquarters. Julian's office was in a glass building that looked like it was made of frozen water. The lobby had a waterfall that didn't splash, and a receptionist who looked like she'd been programmed to smile but not to speak. "I'm here to see my son," I told her. "Do you have an appointment, mister?" "I'm his father," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there in my flannel shirt and my work boots, looking at her until she picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, Julian appeared. He looked agitated, checking his watch, a sleek silver thing that probably cost more than my first 3 trucks combined. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I'm right in the middle of a briefing with the investors for the Ridge Project." "The Ridge Project," I repeated. "That's a fancy name for the North Woods." "Julian." He grabbed my arm and steered me toward a corner, away from the glass-walled conference room, where 3 men in dark suits were hovering over a digital map of my land. "Look, we're busy, Dad. Tiffany and I are launching the Vance Wellness Resort. It's going to put this town on the map. We're talking high-end cabins, a spa, the works. It's what Mom would have wanted, to see the land actually doing something." The mention of Martha felt like a slap. Martha loved those woods because they were quiet. She loved them because the only wellness you needed there was a pair of sturdy boots and the sound of the wind in the pines. "You're selling the timber rights to pay for the construction, aren't you?" I asked. Julian stiffened. "It's called leveraging assets, Dad. You're retired. You don't see the big picture. We're moving into a new era. The Pioneer Award this Sunday? It's for the vision Tiffany and I have for this county. We're the future." "And the past?" I asked, looking at his polished shoes. "The past is a foundation, Dad. But you don't live in the foundation, you build over it." He checked his watch again. "Look, I have to go. Tiffany's at the caterers for the gala. We'll talk next week, okay? Maybe we can do a quick lunch." My treat. He turned back toward the glass room without waiting for an answer. I watched him go. He walked with a bounce in his step, the stride of a man who thought he'd already crossed the finish line. I walked back to my truck and sat there for a long time. I looked at the dashboard, at the layer of dust that always seemed to settle there no matter how much I cleaned it. Julian didn't realize that the land was held in a very specific type of trust, one that my father had insisted on after seeing a neighbor lose his farm in a bad poker game in the 50s. It was a life estate with reversionary interest. In plain English, it meant that while I had given Julian the title to the land 5 years ago as a pre-inheritance gesture, I retained the absolute right to live on, manage, and control that land until the day I died. He couldn't sell a single toothpick of timber without my notarized signature. And more importantly, if he attempted to encumber the land with debt or sell parts of it without my consent, the title would revert. It would snap back to me entirely, as if the gift had never happened. He'd forgotten the fine print. Or maybe he'd never read it, thinking his old man was just being sentimental with the paperwork. I pulled out my phone and called Tiffany. She answered on the 4th ring. "Arthur, is everything okay? I'm quite busy with the seating arrangements for Sunday. I heard about the Pioneer Award, Tiffany. Congratulations." There was a pause, a long, cold silence. "Oh, Julian was supposed to tell you. It's such a high-level corporate event, Arthur. Very stiff. Lots of speeches about venture capital. We thought you'd be bored to tears. We're planning a much nicer private lunch for you later in the month. Something more your speed." "I see," I said. "More my speed." "Exactly. Anyway, I have to run. The florist is here." She hung up. I didn't feel angry. I felt that strange, quiet calm that comes right before a controlled demolition. You've set the charges. You've cleared the area. Now, you just wait for the clock to hit 0. I drove to Elias Thorne's office. He was waiting for me with a stack of cream-colored folders. "You were right, Arthur," Elias said, sliding a document across the desk. "Julian signed a preliminary sale agreement with a developer out of Atlanta yesterday. He took a $2 million earnest money deposit to fund the gala and Tiffany's new lifestyle. He's claiming full unencumbered ownership. That's fraud, Elias." "Technically, yes, but more importantly for us, it triggers the reversionary clause. The moment he signed that document without your signature, he violated the terms of the trust." Elias leaned back, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. "As of 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Julian Vance doesn't own a single blade of grass on that property. You do, all of it, back in your name, 100%. I looked at the paper. My name was there, bold and final. He doesn't know yet, does he?" I asked. "He thinks he's a pioneer," Elias chuckled. "He thinks he's standing on top of the mountain. He doesn't realize the mountain just moved." "Good," I said, standing up. "Let him enjoy his rehearsals. Let Tiffany pick out the perfect centerpieces. I want them at that dinner on Sunday. I want them at the head table, under the spotlight, feeling like the kings of the world. And then?" "And then," I said, adjusting my flannel shirt, "I'm going to show up. And I'm going to remind them that you never ever stop inviting the man who owns the floor you're standing on. There's a specific kind of cold that doesn't come from the wind. It's the cold of a house that used to be full of laughter, now stripped down to minimalist white walls and expensive candles that smell like nothing at all. I spent Thursday evening sitting in my truck outside the old farmhouse, watching the fireflies dance over the north woods. These were the same woods where I'd taught Julian how to bait a hook and how to respect a boundary line. I remembered the day Martha and I decided to put the land into the trust. We were sitting on the porch, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. "Arthur," she'd said, her hand resting on mine, "our boy has a fast heart. He wants the world to move at his pace. We have to make sure the land stays still, even when he doesn't." She knew. Even then, she saw the strategic growth in him before he even had a name for it. Friday morning, I was at the local bakery, the one where Tiffany gets her artisanal sourdough. When I saw her, she was with 2 women I didn't recognize, dressed in athletic gear that probably cost more than my first tractor. They were looking at a mood board for the Sunday gala. I walked up, my old leather boots scuffing the polished tile. "Morning, Tiffany." The conversation at their table stopped like a record skipping. Tiffany's smile didn't reach her eyes. It didn't even reach her cheeks. It stayed hovering somewhere around her teeth. "Arthur, what a surprise. Are you picking up something for the weekend?" "Just some rolls," I said. "I saw the posters for the Pioneer Award downtown. Big night. I was thinking about the speech Julian might give. He always did have a way with words." One of the women leaned in, looking at my flannel shirt with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "And you are—" "I'm the foundation," I said. Tiffany laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "He's so metaphorical. This is Julian's father, Arthur. He's very old school. He lives out on the old farm." She turned back to me, her voice dropping that talking to a child tone. "Arthur, we're really in the weeds with the final rehearsals. The governor's office might even send a representative. It's just not the kind of environment where you'd feel comfortable. All that standing and small talk. I've stood for 12 hours on a bridge deck in a freezing rain, Tiffany. I think I can handle a ballroom." Her expression hardened. The mask slipped just a fraction. "It's a private table, Arthur. Fixed seating. There literally isn't a chair for you. I'm sorry, but we have to maintain the professional branding for the investors. You understand." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the greed, the social climbing, and the utter lack of respect for the man whose sweat had paid for the very coffee she was sipping. "I understand perfectly," I said. "Enjoy your rolls." I walked out. I didn't look back. I went straight to the barber shop. I told old Joe to give me the boardroom special, the haircut I used to get when I had to convince a city council to spend $8 million on a project they didn't think they needed. By Saturday, the rage was there, but it was quiet. It was the kind of rage that makes your hands steady. I spent the afternoon with Elias Thorne in his back office. We weren't looking at deeds anymore. We were looking at the Vance Heritage Trust bylaws, Section 22, Paragraph 4. Elias pointed out with a silver pen, "As the life tenant and trustee, you have the right to audit and intervene in any public representation of the trust's assets. And Julian is representing the North Woods as his own asset for this gala," I noted. "Exactly. He's using your land as his social capital to win an award and secure more investment. He's essentially selling a house he's only renting." Elias looked at me. "You're sure about this, Arthur? Once we walk into that ballroom, there's no going back to Sunday lunches and rain checks." I thought about the month of May. I thought about the 4 Sundays I spent alone. I thought about Julian's Italian suits and Tiffany's minimalist life that had no room for a man in a flannel shirt. They stopped inviting me to the table, Elias. They decided I was a relic. And the thing about relics is, if you don't treat them with respect, they have a habit of falling on you. "Then I'll see you at 7 p.m. tomorrow," Elias said. "I've got the injunction papers ready. I've even got a notary on standby." I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled my tuxedo out of the cedar chest. It was old, but it was tailor-made from my days as a lead engineer. I brushed the lint off the shoulders. I polished my shoes until I could see the North Woods reflected in the leather. I wasn't going as a supporting character. I wasn't going as sport. I was going as the owner of the mountain. And I was bringing the storm with me. The Meridian Ballroom is the kind of place that smells like expensive perfume and unearned confidence. It's all gold leaf, vaulted ceilings, and crystal chandeliers that vibrate whenever the bass from the string quartet hits a certain frequency. I stood in the lobby at 7:15 p.m., adjusting the cufflinks Martha gave me for our silver anniversary. They were simple gold bars, no diamonds, no flash, just solid, reliable weight. Beside me stood Elias Thorne. In his 3-piece charcoal suit and silk tie, he didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like the man who owned the bank that owned the ballroom. He held a leather briefcase with the Thorne and Associates crest embossed in gold. "Ready, Arthur?" he asked, checking his pocket watch. "I've spent 40 years building things that stay upright in a hurricane, Elias. This room is just a breeze." We walked past the velvet ropes. The young man at the guest list podium looked at my tuxedo, then at Elias, then back at his tablet. He was looking for Arthur Vance, but I knew Tiffany had purged that name weeks ago. "Name, sir?" "I'm the chairman of the Vance Heritage Trust," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had that sight boss resonance that makes people clear a path. "And this is my legal counsel. We're expected at the head table." I didn't wait for him to find the name. I just walked past. When you move like you own the floor, people generally assume you do. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. In the center, under the largest chandelier, was the head table. Julian was there, looking like a prince in a slim-fit tuxedo, laughing with a man I recognized as a high-stakes developer from Atlanta. Tiffany was to his right, wearing a dress that probably cost as much as a mid-sized sedan, holding court with the local socialites. We approached from the blind side. I stood behind Julian's chair for exactly 3 seconds before he felt the shift in the air. He turned, his glass of sparkling water halfway to his lips, and his face went through a physical transformation. The color drained out of his cheeks, leaving him looking like the white marble statues lining the walls. "Dad?" he whispered. It wasn't a greeting, it was a plea. Tiffany turned next. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed into two sharp slits of pure, icy panic. She looked at my tuxedo, then at Elias, and I could practically hear her brain trying to market disrupt the situation. "Arthur," she hissed, leaning in so the developers wouldn't hear. "What are you doing?" "We told you, there is no seating for you. This is a closed corporate event." "The thing about closed events, Tiffany," I said, pulling an empty chair from the next table over and placing it right between her and Julian, "is that they usually require the permission of the property owner." I sat down. Elias remained standing behind me, his briefcase resting on the white linen tablecloth like a dormant landmine. "Julian," I said, looking my son in the eye, "I hear you're winning an award tonight for your vision for the North Woods. That's a bold thing to claim when you don't even own the dirt they grow in." Julian leaned in, his voice shaking. "Dad, don't do this here. We have $2 million in earnest money sitting in the business account. If you embarrass us in front of these investors, the whole deal collapses. We lose everything. You already lost it, Julian," Elias Thorne said, stepping forward. He opened the briefcase and slid a single notarized document in front of Julian. "As of 4 p.m. Wednesday, the reversionary clause of the Vance Heritage Trust was triggered by your attempted unauthorized sale of protected timberland. The title has reverted. Your father is now the 100% unencumbered owner of the North Woods. You are currently trespassing on his brand." Tiffany snatched the paper. She read it, her hand trembling so hard the diamonds on her fingers blurred. This is a technicality. You can't just take it back. We've spent months branding this. The Pioneer Award is about our future." "Your future was built on a lie, Tiffany," I said. "You stopped inviting me to dinner because I was old school. You thought I was a supporting character in your story. But you forgot who wrote the script." At that moment, the Master of Ceremonies took the stage. "And now, for the highlight of our evening. The Pioneer Award for Regional Vision and Development. Julian and Tiffany Vance." The room erupted in applause. The spotlight swung toward our table, blindingly bright. Julian sat frozen. Tiffany tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace of pain. "They're calling your name, sport," I said quietly. "Are you going to tell them about the wellness retreat? Or should I have Elias explain the reversionary interest to the governor's rep?" Julian looked at the stage, then at me. For the first time in 6 years, he didn't look like a strategic growth consultant. He looked like my son, scared, small, and realizing that the man he'd tried to prune away was the only thing keeping him from falling. "Dad," he choked out. "Please. I'm not your dad right now, Julian," I said, standing up as the spotlight hit me full force. "Right now I'm the landlord, and I think it's time we had a conversation about the rent." I didn't wait for him. I walked toward the stage. Elias was a half step behind me, the cream-colored folders tucked under his arm, like a silent promise of what was coming next. The room went quiet. The applause died. The shapers and movers of the county watched as a man in an old-school tuxedo and a shark of a lawyer took the podium before the award winners could even stand up. "Good evening," I said into the microphone. My voice was calm, steady, and loud enough to reach the very back of the hall. "My name is Arthur Vance, and before we give out any awards for the North Woods, there are a few things you all deserve to know about the foundation they're built on." The silence in the Meridian Ballroom wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a car crash, before the dust settles and the screaming starts. I stood at that mahogany podium, the light reflecting off the brass microphone, and I didn't look at the governor's representative or the high-stakes developers. I looked directly at Table 12, where Julian and Tiffany sat like wax figures melting under a heat lamp. A pioneer, I began, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, is someone who goes first, someone who clears the brush and marks the trail so others can follow. My grandfather was a pioneer. He bought the North Woods when they were nothing but swamp and pine, and he spent 40 years making sure they stayed that way. He didn't build luxury spas, he built a legacy. I saw the lead developer from Atlanta, a man named Henderson, lean over to Julian and whisper something. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on the cream-colored folder Elias was currently opening on the edge of the stage. My son and his wife have spent the last year telling you about their vision, I continued. They've taken your earnest money. They've promised you commercial zoning. They've sold you a dream of a wellness resort that treats nature like a background for a photo op. But there is a fundamental rule in engineering. You cannot build a skyscraper on a shifting sandbar. I reached into Elias's briefcase and pulled out the original deed. I held it up. It looked small against the backdrop of that grand room, but it felt like a mountain in my hand. This is the Vance Heritage Trust, I said. Section 14, paragraph 2. It's a life estate with reversionary interest. What that means, in plain old-school English, is that Julian Vance never had the legal authority to sign a single contract regarding that land. He was a caretaker, not a king. And the moment he attempted to sell the timber rights to fund this very gala, the moment he tried to leverage the dirt my wife is buried near, the title snapped back to me. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Henderson, the developer, stood up. His face was a shade of red that suggested his blood pressure was currently off the charts. Are you saying the contracts we signed with Vance Strategic Growth are void? I'm saying they never existed. Elias Thorne stepped up to the microphone, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a legal scalpel. The earnest money Julian accepted was taken under false pretenses. As of this moment, a cease and desist has been filed. Any equipment moved on to that land will be impounded for trespassing. And the Pioneer Award is being given to a man who, legally speaking, doesn't own the chair he's sitting in. I looked back at Julian. He finally looked up. There was no strategic growth left in him. He looked like the 10-year-old boy I'd once caught lying about a broken window. Tiffany, however, hadn't given up. She stood up, her voice screeching across the ballroom. This is a family matter. Arthur is just... He's confused. He's old. He doesn't understand modern business structures. I understand that you stopped inviting me to dinner, Tiffany, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. I understand that you thought I was a liability to your branding. You wanted a modern family without the embarrassing old man in the flannel shirt. Well, here is the modern reality the old man just foreclosed on your lifestyle. I turned back to the audience. There is no Ridge Project. There is no wellness resort. There is only the Vance Woods. And they will remain exactly as they are, quiet, protected, and closed to anyone who thinks money is a substitute for character. I stepped down from the podium. I didn't wait for the MC to speak. I didn't wait for the applause that wouldn't come. I walked straight to table 12. Julian was staring at the $2 million earnest money check he'd displayed in a silver frame on the table. It was now just a piece of paper that represented a looming prison sentence for fraud if he didn't return every cent by Monday morning. The check is going back, Julian, I said, standing over him. Every penny. And the condo downtown? The one with the white walls? I suggest you start packing. The pioneer lifestyle is over. You're coming back to the farmhouse. You're going to help me replant the pines you tried to sell. Julian looked at Tiffany, who was frantically typing on her phone, likely calling a publicist or a divorce lawyer. Then he looked at me. For the first time in 6 years, he actually saw me. I'm sorry, Dad. he whispered. I know you are, Sport, I said. But the thing about bridges is, once they collapse, you have to clear the rubble before you can even think about rebuilding. Start clearing. I walked toward the exit. Elias was right behind me, snapping his briefcase shut with a satisfying click. Behind us, the ballroom was in chaos. The Pioneer Award sat abandoned on the stage, a gold-plated lie in a room full of people who were suddenly realizing that the most powerful man in the room was the one they had tried to forget. The aftermath of a collapse is always quieter than the fall itself. By Monday morning, the Vance Strategic Growth website had been replaced by a generic under-maintenance screen, and the glass office with the non-splashing waterfall was locked tight. The developers from Atlanta hadn't just pulled their funding, they had filed a joint intent to sue for misrepresentation. Julian wasn't a pioneer anymore. He was a man staring at a mountain of legal paperwork that no amount of synergy could fix. I was back on my porch by 6 Subble Am, the air cool and smelling of damp earth. I wasn't wearing a tuxedo. I was back in my flannel, my Casio watch ticking steadily on my wrist. Elias Thorne pulled up in his black sedan, stepping out with 2 cardboard cups of coffee and a folder that looked considerably thinner than the ones from the ballroom. It's done, Arthur, Elias said, handing me a cup. Julian signed the rescission papers an hour ago. He's returning the earnest money from the business account. And Tiffany, well, Tiffany has moved into a hotel downtown. She's claiming she was misled by Julian's financial projections. She's protecting her brand, I said, taking a sip of the bitter, hot coffee. I expected nothing less. And Julian? He's in the North Woods, I said, nodding toward the tree line. I told him if he wanted to live under a roof I owned, he had to earn the air he breathed. He's out there with a surveyor's tape and a notebook. He's measuring the growth of the saplings he almost sold for scrap. Elias looked out at the woods. You're a hard man, Arthur. Most fathers would have just written a check to cover the mess. Writing a check doesn't fix a structural flaw, Elias. It just hides it behind a fresh coat of paint. Julian needed to feel the weight of the dirt. He needed to understand that a man's worth isn't in his invitation list, but in the ground he's willing to stand on when the lights go out. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. If you've made it this far, remember, the best revenge isn't just winning, it's restoring the truth. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. We love hearing your stories of silent strength. By Tuesday, the news of the Meridian meltdown had traveled through the county like a brush fire. People who hadn't called me in years were suddenly leaving voicemails, asking for advice or wanting to catch up. I deleted them all. I didn't need a new circle of friends, I just needed the one I already had to be honest. Julian walked up the porch steps around noon. He was sweaty, his expensive haircut was ruined by pine needles, and his hands, the hands that used to only hold smartphones and wine glasses, were blistered. He sat down on the top step, his head in his hands. The North Ridge is at 14% incline near the creek, he muttered. The soil is too soft for those cabins Tiffany wanted anyway. The whole thing would have slid into the water within 5 years. I know, I said. I told you that 3 years ago. You just weren't listening because I wasn't using a PowerPoint. Julian looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. The strategic growth mask had been buried under 8 hours of manual labor. Why didn't you just stop me earlier, Dad? Why wait for the dinner? Because, Julian, I said, leaning forward, you didn't just need to lose the land. You needed to lose the audience. You were performing for people who didn't care about you, and you were willing to sacrifice the people who did just to keep the show going. I had to wait until you were center stage so that when the floor gave way, you'd finally look down and see what was actually holding you up. He looked away, toward the farmhouse. Tiffany's filing for divorce. She says I'm a liability to her future. She's right, I said, not unkindly. As long as your future is built on appearances, you'll always be a liability to people like her. But out here, on this land, you're just a man with a blister. And blisters heal into calluses. Calluses make you strong. I stood up and tossed him a pair of heavy leather work gloves. Get some water. We've got another 50 acres to survey before sundown. And Julian? He looked up, catching the gloves. Sunday dinner is at 6 p.m. In the kitchen. There's a chair for you, but you're washing the dishes. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth, the first one I'd seen since he was a teenager. Yes, sir. 6 p.m. I watched him walk back toward the woods. He wasn't bouncing anymore. He was treading carefully, his eyes on the ground, learning the terrain. Some people think revenge is about destruction. They think it's about leaving your enemies with nothing. But the real best revenge, the dad's true revenge, is different. It's about taking a life that was built on sand and forcing it back onto the rock. It's about making the people who stopped inviting you to dinner realize that they were only eating because you provided the table. I walked inside my house, the farmhouse that smelled like rosemary and old wood. I looked at the Casio on my wrist. It was 12:15 p.m. The bridge was holding. The foundation was solid. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in the house didn't feel like a leak. It felt like peace.